She was humiliated and kicked out of the Airbase. She was just a woman. But when everything went wrong, she was the only one who could lift the SR-72 Darkstar into the sky. The way she came back, no one will forget. Subscribe to the channel and post where you're watching this video from in the comments. The sky over Nevada stretched wide and cloudless, a dome of relentless blue pressing down on the blistered earth. The Aegis X training facility stood like a monument to steel ambition, all sharp angles and high fences, watched by cameras that blinked like indifferent gods. Inside those walls, pilots were forged, not born, they like to say, though some came with enough pedigree and privilege to skip the fire altogether. Nia Thompson had come through fire, all right, just not the kind anyone here respected. She arrived with 2 duffel bags, calloused hands, and a worn leather flight jacket that once belonged to a man named Joseph Thompson. Mechanic, dreamer, part-time crop duster, and the only person who'd ever looked at her and said, "You belong in the air, baby girl." The jacket smelled faintly of oil and old smoke. She wore it like armor as the shuttle from Henderson dropped her at the main gate, the buzz of engines fading into the desert heat. They didn't expect her, not really. Her acceptance into the elite Aegis X pilot program had caused a flurry of confusion and murmurs in the back offices. She didn't come from a military family, had no Ivy League degree, no senator uncle. Just a stack of test scores that screamed impossible, and a stubbornness that frightened bureaucrats more than failure. Some assumed it was a diversity move, others called it an oversight. But the paperwork was processed, the clearance badges printed, and there was her name, Thompson, N., etched beside a call sign she hadn't earned yet. The intake hall was sterile and humming with clipped voices. Young men, some barely 20, stood in tight clusters, laughing about fuel ratios and combat sims. Their uniforms still held creases from shipping. They watched her with the same amusement reserved for exotic animals at the zoo. "Lost, ma'am?" one of them said as she passed, a smirk dancing on his lips. Nia didn't flinch. She had no time for boys playing dress-up in their father's shadows. The orientation was run by Lieutenant Kowalski, a man whose face looked permanently irritated. He read from a tablet as if the words bored him, then launched into a lecture on rules, ranks, and repercussions. When he reached her name on the roster, his voice stumbled just for a second before recovering with a bite of disdain. "Thompson, you'll be assigned to Delta Cohort. Try not to slow them down." She nodded once, nothing else. Her quarters were a concrete rectangle with a cot, a locker, and a cracked mirror. The air smelled of disinfectant and the faint ozone of old electronics. She unpacked in silence, placing a single photo on the desk. Her father, grinning beside his rusted biplane, one arm wrapped around her younger self, both covered in engine grease. She touched the edge of the frame before turning to the schedule blinking on her screen. First sim session in 6 hours. No welcome. No easing in. That was fine by her. The first day was a gauntlet. Simulators that replicated high-altitude combat scenarios, emergency response drills, physical conditioning tests designed to break even seasoned athletes. Nia didn't just hold her own, she excelled. Her instincts were sharp, honed by years of flying under the radar, figuratively and literally, on patched-up aircraft that would have made these boys cry. But her scores raised eyebrows, not applause. "You're not following standard response timing," an instructor snapped during her post-simulation debrief. "I adapted to wind shear," she replied, calm but firm. "Standard timing would have dropped me into a stall." The instructor didn't argue, but her score was quietly revised the next day. She noticed, said nothing. By the end of the first week, she knew exactly where she stood. The boys of Delta cohort had stopped trying to flirt and started avoiding her outright. In the cafeteria, she ate alone. In the gym, equipment she used was mysteriously under maintenance. The locker next to hers was routinely searched. No one said it outright, but the message was clear. She was an intruder. The worst came not from her peers, but from those in command. Her simulator access was repeatedly delayed due to technical errors. Her assignments were shifted last minute, keeping her off balance. When she submitted requests to review her performance data, the system flagged them as unauthorized. She began to suspect sabotage but had no proof, and reporting it would brand her as unstable or paranoid. Death sentences in a program built on perceived precision. Nights were the hardest. That was when the doubts crept in, whispering in the darkness. Maybe they were right. Maybe she didn't belong. Maybe she was just a ghetto girl playing at hero, trying to wear a sky that wasn't made for her, but every time those thoughts took root, she pulled on her father's jacket and stepped outside onto the empty runway behind the hangars. There she would stand for hours, staring at the stars, whispering under her breath, "You belong in the air." She wasn't the only one watching. From behind security feeds and maintenance logs, an old man with silver stubble and grease-stained fingers had been observing her. Thomas "Smokey" Harris, a forgotten legend who once helped build dreams with wrenches and wire. Now he moved through the base like a ghost, tending to broken things the brass no longer noticed. He'd seen girls like her before, fiery, brilliant, and marked for erasure. On her 10th day, she found a small slip of paper tucked into her flight manual. No signature, just coordinates and a time. Curiosity, or desperation, led her there. At 0200, she entered a decommissioned maintenance hangar on the far edge of the base. It was silent, dusty, lined with old parts and shadows, and there, surrounded by the skeletal remains of obsolete drones and stripped engines, stood Smokey. "You fly like someone who's been lied to," he said by way of introduction. Naya crossed her arms. "Is that supposed to be a compliment?" "It's supposed to be a question." She didn't answer, but he saw the spark behind her eyes. The same spark that once blazed in her father's. "What if I told you this program doesn't want pilots?" he said, voice low. "It wants soldiers who obey, not flyers who think." She blinked. That wasn't the first time she'd heard something like that, but coming from him, it felt different. Real. He led her deeper into the hangar to a rusted simulator console buried under tarps. The design was unfamiliar, almost alien. "What is this?" "Prototype SR-72, Darkstar's test rig, officially mothballed after failing its first trials. Unofficially, it's the closest thing to real flying you'll ever touch." Her hands itched. She wanted to reach out to feel it, but hesitation held her back. "Why me?" Smokey smiled, not kindly. "Because you're the only one here who isn't scared of this bird." That night, for the first time in weeks, Naya felt something click into place. Not acceptance, not safety, but purpose. When she laid in bed afterward, eyes wide open in the dark, her heart beat like a jet engine winding up for takeoff. The fire was back. She wasn't here to be tolerated. She was here to fly. And no matter how many gates they closed, she would find a way to reach the sky. What she didn't know, couldn't know yet, was that the most dangerous part of her journey hadn't even begun. Because the closer you get to the sky, the more people want to see you fall. The mornings at Aegis X were always brutal, beginning before dawn with the shrill scream of reveille and ending with the kind of exhaustion that made bones ache. But since that night in the forgotten hangar, Naya had begun to feel different. She moved through the regimented routine with a deeper stillness, her mind split between the daily grind and the quiet secret she now carried. The knowledge of the SR-72 simulator and the man who guarded it had rooted itself inside her like a second heartbeat. Every moment of stillness, every breath between drills and debriefs, she thought about the control panel under her hands, the hum of that ancient machine, the way it responded not just to inputs but to intention. Smokey hadn't spoken much that first night. He let the machine do the talking. When she slid into the simulator seat and wrapped her fingers around the stick, something primal lit up in her. The interface was alien, fluid, non-linear, a far cry from the rigid structure of F-35 or F-22 cockpits, but her hands adapted without conscious thought. Smokey watched in silence, arms crossed, as she completed an initial startup sequence on her first try. No instruction, just instinct. When she looked over at him, unsure if she had done something wrong, he only nodded once and said, "Yup, thought so." He told her to come back the next night, same time. No one else needed to know. She didn't ask how he had access, didn't demand credentials. Trust, she figured, was a rare currency, and if he was spending it on her, she wasn't about to waste it. So she did. Every night, while the other cadets collapsed into sleep or drank themselves numb behind closed doors, Naya slipped through shadowed maintenance halls and climbed through rusted service ladders to reach Hangar 19. There, in the cathedral of forgotten tech and cobwebbed steel, she trained. It wasn't just flying. Smokey taught her the guts of the machine. Circuit overlays, sensor matrices, thermal bleed routing. He walked her through the nuances of hypersonic airflow, the violent instability of crossing Mach 5, and the dangers of handling a platform where the human nervous system simply wasn't fast enough to compensate for error. "The SR-72 doesn't ask for forgiveness," he said once, wiping sweat from his brow as she recalibrated the lateral drift actuator. "It demands you be perfect, or you die." Naya understood that, more than she wanted to admit. What disturbed her more than the simulator's difficulty, or even its alarming responsiveness, was what she discovered about her own records. Smokey had access to logs that most cadets would never dream of seeing. One evening, after a particularly intense training run where she had executed a velocity inversion maneuver that hadn't been officially attempted in years, he leaned over his battered laptop and grunted. "Thought so," he muttered, and turned the screen to her. It was her profile. Except it wasn't. The flight sim scores listed were laughable, some barely above baseline competency. Several entries were missing altogether, marked as data corrupted or session invalidated. According to this log, Naya hadn't passed a single advanced scenario since arriving. She stared at it, stunned. "That's not right. That's not even close to right." "No kidding," Smokey replied, tapping the screen. "These fields are being overwritten. See the timestamps? Edits made after your session's end. Somebody's cooking your file." Her mouth was dry. "Can you trace it?" "Already did. Internal access, officer level. Clean job, too. Would have fooled anyone who didn't know what they were looking at." "Who?" He looked at her, the lines on his face deepening. "You know who?" She did. The name came unbidden. Captain Roy Manners. The golden boy of the base. The one they all called Commander Next. He had charm, bloodlines, and a list of confirmed kills that made him a media darling. He also had a simmering contempt for anyone who didn't fit the mold, and Naya had never fit the mold. "He's the reason I'm getting reassigned," she said softly, reading through the log again. Every time I come close to proving I belong, the rug gets pulled." "More than that," Smokey replied. "He's making sure you disappear." The air felt heavy, like storm clouds building behind her eyes. "Why?" "Because if you stay," he said, "he knows he'll have to beat you for real, and I don't think he can." It wasn't praise, it was a challenge. She felt it settle in her bones. From that night on, their sessions grew longer, sharper. Smokey stopped pulling punches. He threw real system failures into her simulations, overrode safeties, introduced environmental hazards mid-run. Once, he cut main power without warning and forced her to land the Darkstar blind. She did it, heart hammering in her chest, sweat soaking through her clothes. When she climbed out, trembling, he handed her a flask of lukewarm water and said, "Now you're ready to scare people." But the outside world didn't stop. During the day, her ostracization deepened. The other cadets now whispered openly. One of them, a lanky southerner named Price, accidentally dumped engine coolant on her duffel bag. Another, a smug brat named Tressler, asked her in front of a full class, "Do they even make G-suits for hips like that?" The instructors didn't intervene. Some even smirked. At first, she said nothing, but after a particularly grueling group flight sim, where she was blamed for a failure that occurred before her segment had even begun, she marched straight to the evaluation office and demanded a full transcript of her performance. It was denied. "Security protocols," said Lieutenant Kowalski, not bothering to hide his boredom. She didn't bother replying. She didn't need the files anymore. She had the truth. Later that week, she overheard Manners in the officers' mess, holding court for a group of visiting brass. He was all teeth and charisma, talking about the upcoming demonstration flight for SR-72, a closed event scheduled for a select audience of Pentagon and NATO officials. "We'll show them that America still owns the stratosphere," he said, raising a glass. "With me in the cockpit, they'll know exactly where the future's headed." The others laughed. Naya didn't, because she knew something they didn't. SR-72 wasn't ready. Smokey had told her so in the quiet moments between systems checks and wiring calibrations. The prototype Manners planned to fly, codenamed Valkyrie, had been heavily modified. Too heavily. He demanded the responsiveness be adjusted, saying it was laggy and soft. But the engineers had warned him. The delay wasn't a flaw, it was a feature. The human mind needed that buffer. Remove it, and even elite pilots could misfire. He'd ignored them. And now he was going to fly it in front of the most powerful men and women in the world. Or try to. Naya felt the weight of decision pressing down on her. Smokey saw it too. One evening, as she exited the simulator, drenched in sweat and nerves, he handed her a set of blueprints. "This is everything," he said. "Valkyrie's guts, every mod, every screw. You study this, and you'll know her better than anyone alive." She looked up. "Why are you giving me this?" "Because you're the only one who might stop what's coming." Her pulse thudded in her ears. "You want me to fly?" "I want you to be ready," he said, "in case you have to." That night, as she lay in bed listening to the low roar of jets overhead, she understood something with aching clarity. They had never intended to let her succeed, but they hadn't counted on her fighting back. And if the day came, if the moment presented itself, she wouldn't hesitate. She would rise, because that was what the sky demanded. Not obedience, but truth. The wind that swept across the tarmac that morning carried with it the sharp scent of burnt jet fuel and the cold tang of coming change. Naya stood just outside Hangar 6, watching the sun climb over the serrated ridge in the distance, the light bleeding gold onto the rows of metallic monsters resting under tarps and steel doors. Beneath her calm exterior, her pulse thrummed with unease. Something was shifting at Aegis X, and the stillness in the air felt like the breath before a storm. Inside the glass-fronted officers' lounge that overlooked the eastern flight deck, the elite cohort known as Phantom 12 gathered in loose formation around Captain Roy Manners, their golden boy and commander in all but title. Dressed in his signature olive flight jacket, with personalized patches and mirrored aviators perched above his forehead, Manners exuded confidence in the way only men born into power could. His posture was relaxed, his smirk practiced, and every gesture calculated for effect. The others followed him with unspoken reverence. Tressler with his cruel grin, Price always sneering, even Wexler, the quiet one who never spoke unless spoken to. 12 men, all scions of generals, senators, or billionaires, each chosen not only for skill but for image. They were the face of the future, or so the brass wanted the world to believe. They called themselves Wolves. Manners made sure of that. "Show's in 10 days, he said, flicking open a tablet displaying the test schedule. "And I don't want a single damn error. Pentagon wants blood and thunder. I want applause." "You flying Valkyrie?" Tressler asked, only half pretending he didn't already know. Manners smiled, teeth white and perfect. "Of course I am. Who else here has the stones?" Laughter rippled through the group. Naya watched from a distance, unseen, unacknowledged. To them, she was a shadow in the corner, something less than real. But she saw everything. The subtle corrections Manners gave during simulator evaluations. The way he leaned close to instructors before reports were filed. The code strings he keyed into debrief terminals, always under the guise of correcting errors. She had begun keeping notes, screenshots, fragments of data quietly saved to a secure drive Smokey had helped her encrypt. It was more than sabotage now. It was strategy. Captain Manners didn't just dislike her. He feared her. She had come too far, risen too fast, and proved too much. And in a place built on legacy and controlled ascent, that made her dangerous. Later that day, in the operations briefing hall, the project director, Colonel Esteban Rourke, delivered a curt update on the upcoming demonstration to a packed room of pilots and support staff. Representatives from the Department of Defense, NATO allies, and 2 major aerospace contractors would be arriving the following week. The demonstration would be broadcast through encrypted channels to command bases across 3 continents. It wasn't just a show, it was a sales pitch. "We'll be pushing the SR-72 to its operational edge," Rourke said. "This is not a test flight. It's an exhibition of air dominance. Any screw-ups will be felt all the way back to Washington." Manners raised his hand with the casual confidence of someone who already knew he had the starring role. "Sir, has a lead pilot been designated for Valkyrie?" Rourke didn't hesitate. "You're the face of the project, Manners. I expect you to deliver." Another ripple of smirking approval passed through the room. Naya felt the room grow colder. Beside her, Smokey remained silent, but his jaw tightened slightly. He didn't look at her, but she could feel the shift in his stance, the way his hands clenched behind his back. That evening, back in Hangar 19, Naya ran another sequence in the simulator, one of the newer modules designed to mimic atmospheric re-entry at Mach 6.3. It was barely stabilized, filled with unpredictability. Most cadets weren't even allowed to access it. But she didn't need permission anymore. The simulator belonged to her now. She navigated the descent with surgical focus, calculating vectors and adjusting plasma shielding parameters like a composer conducting a symphony. When the final screen flashed green, the word "Mission Complete" glowing in sterile white, she didn't smile. She only exhaled. Smokey was waiting with a mug of bitter coffee. "You heard?" he asked. She nodded. "Manners is flying Valkyrie. He's already made 2 undocumented changes to the control schema," Smokey said, "both against engineering advisement. Too much sensitivity on pitch and throttle for a ship that responds faster than the human brain can register. He thinks it makes him look sharper," Naya replied, "like he's got reflexes faster than everyone else. He doesn't. He's going to redline that bird and take half the desert with him." She looked down at the schematics spread across the table. "Then we need to stop him." Smokey sighed. "I can't just march in there and call him out. You know how deep his connections run." "I don't care," she said, voice steel. "I'll go to Rourke." "And say what? That your records were tampered with and you've been flying unauthorized simulations in a restricted hangar? That I've been helping you? They'll bury both of us." She said nothing. The silence was answer enough. After a long moment, he leaned forward. "There's someone else. Lieutenant Raya Mason, flight control, quiet, keeps to herself, but she's not blind. I've seen her watching him. If there's anyone on that side who might listen, it's her." Naya considered it. "How do I find her?" "She runs night shifts on the east observation deck. Tell her what you told me." That night, Naya made her way across the wind-blasted walkways of the base to the dim tower that overlooked the active test range. Inside, rows of monitors blinked with telemetry and tracking data, all managed by a skeleton crew of technicians. Lieutenant Mason stood near the back, arms crossed, eyes fixed on a radar return slowly circling the outer ring of the airspace. She was tall, mid-30s, her dark brown hair tucked into a tight braid, and her expression unreadable. "I know what you've seen," Naya said without preamble, "and I know you know it's wrong." Mason didn't turn. "I've seen your name on every after-action report," Naya continued. "I've seen the way you pause when Manners edits his data. You've got questions, so do I." Now Mason turned, slowly, eyes narrowing. "You're the one he's trying to push out." Naya nodded. "What do you want?" "Help me stop him. Help me prove what he's doing." Mason studied her for a long moment. Then she stepped closer and lowered her voice. "If I help you, and this goes wrong, I lose everything." "We both do," Naya said. "But if we do nothing, he'll fly that monster and kill himself, or worse, prove that this program is as corrupt as the rest of them." Mason's expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes flickered. Then she nodded once. "Meet me tomorrow, Hangar 9, before first light." The next few days were a blur of calculated preparation. Mason began quietly feeding Naya internal schedules, security gaps, and equipment logs. Smokey secured overrides to access Valkyrie's maintenance logs without tripping alerts. Naya redoubled her training, spending every spare second in the simulator, pushing the Darkstar to limits the engineers had barely dared to test. At night, the 3 of them met in storage rooms and equipment bays, speaking in hushed tones under red lights. They mapped their plan like insurgents, with precision and trust born of desperation. The idea was simple in theory, but perilous in execution. Naya would use a dormant backup prototype, SR-72-2 Spectre, to intercept Valkyrie during the demonstration if it began to fail. She would stabilize the flight, divert Manners if necessary, and expose the program's deeper rot in full view of the Pentagon. There was only one problem. She would be doing it without clearance, which meant if she failed, Or if they were caught, she wouldn't just be court-martialed. She'd be erased. Smokey gave her the final override key on a USB drive the size of a dog tag. "You activate this," he said. "You're committed. No going back." She took it. I never was going back. On the morning of the final systems test, as Manners strutted across the flight line in full pilot regalia, surrounded by cameras and officers, Naya stood in the shadows of Hangar 19, looking up at Spectre. Its matte black hull gleamed in the dim light, its sharp wings curled like a hawk in mid-dive. She rested her hand on the fuselage. "We fly soon," she whispered. Above her, in the distance, Valkyrie roared to life. The wolves were in the sky, and Naya was coming for them. The morning she was officially discharged began with the same metallic drone of the base siren that had announced every day before it. But to Naya Thompson, the sound carried a finality it had never held before. She dressed in silence, tugging on the crisp uniform that still bore her name, even though the system had already marked her as inactive. Her locker stood open, half empty. The photograph of her father still rested on the narrow desk. She picked it up with steady fingers, held it for a long moment, then placed it into her bag. There was no ceremony to endings here, just procedure and doors that closed behind you. When she arrived at the administrative office, Lieutenant Kowalski greeted her with an almost theatrical shrug, handing her a slim manila folder. "Final orders. 48 hours to clear your gear and exit base perimeter. You'll find your debrief instructions enclosed, and a recommendation for reassignment." Naya opened the folder. A single-page form. No mention of her simulator achievements, no acknowledgement of sabotage, countless hours logged in the dead of night learning a system most here didn't even understand. It said only this: "Subject failed to demonstrate operational alignment with Aegis X standards." She folded the page and looked up. "You and I both know this is political." Kowalski smiled, bored. "I know it's final." He turned back to his screen. That was that. No one followed her out. No one spoke to her in the mess hall as she passed through one last time. Even those who had once hurled snide comments her way now offered only silence. She had become a non-entity, an erasure in progress. Later that afternoon, she sat in the shade of a grounded cargo hauler on the far edge of the compound, her bag beside her, eyes fixed on the horizon. The flight line shimmered in the heat, and somewhere beyond the hangars, Valkyrie waited in its cradle of steel, gleaming and hungry. She knew the schedule. Manners would run his final pre-flight in 2 days. He would fly that machine, grinning for the generals, and take the glory that had never truly belonged to him. And when he lost control, because he would, because she had seen the error in the response curves, because she had trained in that very profile, someone else would pay the price. Not him, not the system. She should have left. That was a rational move, but rationality had never been her engine. Fire was, and it still burned too bright to allow retreat. That night, under the familiar shadow of Hangar 19, she met Smokey without a word. His face was grim, jaw locked tight with unspoken resolve. "I found it," he said, gesturing toward a massive tarp at the rear of the hangar. "Spectre, SR-72 Prototype 2, never flown, mostly ignored. The engineers left it half-configured, said it was unstable. But you could fly her." Naya stepped forward as he pulled the tarp aside. The aircraft lay dormant, sleek and beautiful, a monster coiled in hibernation. It bore no markings, no name. She placed her hand on the cold alloy skin. "She's perfect." "We'll need to patch the interface," Smokey said, already moving toward his tool bench. "Half the avionics are still running the original test OS. But she's structurally sound. And if you bring your nav protocols from the sim, I can make her dance," Naya finished. They worked through the night. Cables hissed and sparked as Smokey rerouted power, rebooted processors. Naya handled the pilot interface, calibrating throttle inputs, reassigning sensor functions, modifying redundancy systems until the instrument panel glowed with life. She brought up her flight data logs from previous runs in Valkyrie's simulator and overlaid them onto Spectre's UI. It responded smoothly, as though recognizing its purpose for the first time. When the sun began to rise, staining the hangar doors with light, they stepped back, exhausted. "She'll be ready," Smokey said, "but there's one problem, getting you inside without being arrested. I'll figure it out." He gave her a long look. "This isn't a game, Naya. You do this, and they'll come for you. Hard. They're already coming. I'd rather meet them in the sky." Later that day, she found Rhea Mason waiting near the southern comms tower. The lieutenant wore a neutral expression, but her eyes betrayed something like respect. "There's been a shift in security protocol," Mason said, pulling a small keycard from her sleeve. "You've been flagged for removal. If you cross into Zone C, your ID will trip an alert, but this," she handed over the card, "will get you through if you time it right." Naya took it. "Thank you." "I'm not doing it for you," Mason replied. "I'm doing it because Manners is going to kill himself. Or worse, someone else. He doesn't understand what he's flying." "I do." Mason nodded once. "Then fly." That evening, Naya began assembling her escape plan. She timed the rotations of the guard stations, studied the maintenance logs for window gaps, memorized the walk patterns of security patrols. Smokey provided her with a fabricated technician badge, forged from an old access token he had reprogrammed to match her biometric data. Mason adjusted the base logs to show her shuttle departing 12 hours early, a clerical error that would buy them time. The last thing she needed was the suit. The flight suit she had worn for simulations had already been reclaimed, but Smokey led her to a sealed locker deep within Hangar 12, where prototypes and gear long since retired were stored under layers of dust. Inside, wrapped in a protective seal, was a custom-fitted pressure suit. Black and unadorned, it bore no insignia. It had been designed for SR-72 missions, cut for pilots the program had deemed too valuable to risk standard gear on. When she put it on, it felt like a second skin. She pulled the helmet over her head and snapped it into place. The hiss of pressure equalizing made her heart stutter. "This belongs to your father?" Smokey said quietly. She turned sharply. "What?" "I wasn't supposed to tell you," he said. "He was involved in early prototype work back when the SR project was still blacklisted, before they pushed him out. This was his flight model." Naya looked down at the suit again, her throat tight. "He always wanted to fly it," Smokey added. "They never let him." She nodded once, sharply. "Then I'll fly it for both of us." At 0300, the base was quiet. The desert wind whispered across the fences, tugging gently at the edges of tarps and jackets left on lines. Naya moved through the service corridors like a shadow, every step calculated. Mason had arranged a vehicle transfer at Hangar 19, logged under a non-existent technician ID. It gave her a 15-minute window to reach Spectre and prep the system without triggering the live feed. Smokey was already there, running final diagnostics. "She's ready," he said. "You?" She looked at the sleek jet and felt no fear, only fire. "Let's get airborne." He handed her the activation tag. "Remember, once you're in the air, it's all you. I'll mask your signal for as long as I can, but once they catch you on radar, I'll be too fast to stop." Smokey smiled, pride gleaming behind his fatigue. She climbed into the cockpit, fingers moving through the startup sequence as if she'd been born doing it. The HUD glowed to life. Systems check, green. Fuel levels, optimal. Engine temperatures, nominal. Spectre purred. She felt her breath hitch as the final indicator lit up. SR-72. Spectre. Flight control, active. She closed her eyes for a moment and felt the weight of everything. Her father's memory, the nights alone in the simulator, the slurs, the silence, the 1,000 ways they had tried to break her. She opened her eyes and whispered, "Not today." Then she reached for the throttle. Outside, the sky began to change, a sliver of pale light chasing away the dark. Nia Thompson was no longer part of their program, but she wasn't done. She was about to make them remember her name. The first thing she felt as Spectre rolled slowly from the darkness of Hangar 19 into the open was the unnatural stillness of the base. At 0345, the air was brittle and cold, the desert winds subdued into a hush like breath held in a crowded room. Stars still clung to the sky, reluctant to vanish, as if they too wanted to see what would happen next. Nia guided the jet onto the secondary taxiway, barely daring to breathe as the great canopy of the prototype hissed shut above her. She had rehearsed this moment 100 times in her mind, and yet, seated inside the cockpit of a machine never before flown, with the stolen keycard warm in her pocket and the ghost of her father's voice whispering through her memory, it felt impossibly real. Everything she was had led to this. Every wound, every lie she'd endured, every hour spent alone in the simulator, while the rest of the base mocked her from behind polished nameplates and borrowed legacies. The instrument panel blinked a steady sequence of green as the systems came online. Her HUD painted the world in clean, ghostly outlines, identifying structures, airspace boundaries, altitude shifts, and base security grids. The AI pilot assistant remained offline per her override. She would fly this herself. No buffers, no safety nets, no one else's hands on the stick. Smokey's voice crackled into her ear through the type band comms they'd routed through a hidden channel. Telemetry's coming through clean. Spectre's holding system pressure. You're good for full thrust in 15 seconds. Don't wait for them to notice. I wasn't planning on waiting for anyone, Nia replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Behind her, beyond the hangar, the east perimeter floodlights began to flicker to life. She could imagine Mason in the control booth, quietly deflecting suspicion, rerouting minor alarms to system maintenance logs, doing everything she could to stall the inevitable. "Get ready," Smokey said. "They'll pick you up on radar in less than 90 seconds. Nia eased the throttle forward. The twin fusion cycle engines shuddered once, then surged alive, and the entire aircraft responded like a thing reborn. The cockpit trembled as Spectre accelerated down the taxiway, tires screaming softly as friction yielded to intention. Spectre, request an emergency override and takeoff authorization. She transmitted through the false channel, already knowing there would be no answer. She didn't need one. At 0352, Nia pushed the throttle to max and slammed forward into the seat as the jet howled down the tarmac and lifted cleanly into the air. The sky met her like a returning daughter. She tore through the first atmospheric layer like a bullet through cloth, gaining altitude with unnatural speed, the pressure around her crushing and intimate. A lover's embrace turned trial. Her suit constricted in perfect sync with her G-loads, compressing at the limbs, lightening at the core, distributing force with beautiful efficiency. Her vision blurred briefly, then cleared as she leveled off at 58,000 feet. Below, the base erupted into confusion. Unauthorized launch from Sector 9. All stations confirm. Scramble priority alert. Unknown aircraft now ascending past 50K. What the hell is it? Get Rourke on the line, now. Naya heard none of it. She had switched to internal comms, letting Mason and Smokey monitor the chaos below. Her world had shrunk to a point, a single, brilliant edge of purpose, and it was pointed directly at destiny. At the same time, Captain Manners stood on the upper runway briefing platform, dressed in full flight gear, smiling into cameras held by military public affairs officers. Behind him, the Valkyrie SR-72 glinted under portable spotlights, its black hull absorbing light like a predator cloaked in myth. "Captain," one of the officers called, pressing a device to his ear, "we have a situation. Unauthorized launch. Interception protocols initiated." Manners frowned. "What aircraft?" "Designation Spectre. Doesn't appear in current logs." He stiffened visibly. The name hit like a punch. He knew what Spectre was. He had buried it. At least, he had thought he had. "Get me into Valkyrie now," he snapped, turning away from the cameras. He launched less than 6 minutes later. Downrange, Naya had already breached Mach 4 and was climbing past 80,000 feet, her control panel stabilizing under her hands like a tamed wildcat. She eased Spectre into a tight arc, correcting for atmospheric drag and adjusting fuel combustion ratios manually. This wasn't the sim. There was no buffer here between precision and annihilation. Her every movement mattered. Every twitch of her wrist could be the difference between glory and disaster. Smokey's voice returned to her headset. "He's in the air. Valkyrie just launched. They're trying to catch you." "Let him," Naya said. She switched to public military frequency, her voice clear and measured. "This is pilot Naya Thompson, flying Spectre SR-72 prototype. I am initiating emergency flight interception under Article 14B of the Military Flight Regulation Code. The pilot, currently scheduled to demonstrate Valkyrie, has modified flight controls beyond safe thresholds. I am requesting full investigation and flight challenge authority." Static followed. Then a tight, furious voice snapped back, unmistakably Manners. "You don't belong in that aircraft, Thompson. Get your ass on the ground before I have you shot down." "You're already out of control," she replied. "You just don't know it yet." She pinged his trajectory data to the channel. "Your angle of attack is 2 degrees off optimal. Your flight path will destabilize when you pass 6.5 Mach unless you adjust throttle modulation manually. You won't make the dive loop clean, and you'll lose the Pentagon before you finish the pass." Silence again. Then, "You're bluffing." "We'll see." The Valkyrie streaked into the sky behind her. They flew together now, 2 black arrows piercing the dawn, cameras locked on from below. Officers crowded command booths, generals leaned into video feeds. The entire world had turned its attention skyward. And there she was, the woman they'd tried to erase, flying beside their champion, flying better. She initiated the inverted roll first, flipping Spectre over at Mach 6.2 and maintaining her line with surgical precision. The world inverted, then righted. She entered the corkscrew descent, manipulating the onboard flow disruptors to maintain vertical compression across lateral G-loads. The maneuver wasn't just difficult. It was impossible on paper, and yet she executed it flawlessly. Manners tried to follow, but his modified controls overcorrected. The Valkyrie shuddered as his pitch dipped too low, his throttle delay kicking in half a second too late. The aircraft bucked violently, alarms blaring in his ears. "Damn it, stabilizer won't lock." Naya spun beneath him, easing Spectre up under his tail. Throttle to 62%. Adjust trim 2 clicks starboard. You're fighting your own changes. Fly it like it was meant to be flown. His reply was a growl of frustration, but he complied. The Valkyrie righted itself, barely, listing slightly but holding altitude. They leveled out side by side. Spectre and Valkyrie, 2 black shadows against the morning. Naya keyed the frequency again. You made a beautiful monster, but you didn't listen to it. You tried to make it yours. She pulled ahead just slightly, and then, with the entire brass of the military watching, she executed the SR-72's crown jewel maneuver, the S-loop hyperdive, a maneuver designed only in theory, too dangerous to attempt, yet plotted in the deepest pages of the simulator's hidden files. She descended into the dive at Mach 6.8, flipped the aircraft belly first, initiated the drift-lift spiral, and slingshotted back upward at an angle only previously modeled in wind tunnels. The crowd at the base fell silent. A beat. Then the tower frequency crackled with a new voice. This is General Marcus Ellison, Strategic Air Command. Miss Thompson, you have control of the sky. Complete your demonstration. She smiled through her visor, and flew. For the next 8 minutes, she danced through air the way poets dream about. Impossible rolls, angle-defying flips, velocity shifts so precise the AI tracking system lagged behind her. Spectre moved like it had waited its entire life to fly under her hand. When she completed the final pass, looping directly over the control tower and banking westward into a perfect descent spiral, the airwaves exploded in chatter. Spectre touched down with a hiss and a roar, wheels kissing the tarmac like a prayer. Naya sat in the cockpit for a moment, trembling, not from fear, from triumph. Behind her, Valkyrie landed hard, uneven, shuddering to a halt. She unstrapped and stepped onto the runway as command vehicles raced toward them. The future had arrived, and her name was Naya Thompson. They surrounded her before the canopy had even finished lifting. Security jeeps fanned out across the landing strip, their headlights slicing through the early morning haze like judgmental eyes. Uniformed personnel stepped out in formation, not with weapons drawn, but with the tense readiness of those unsure whether to salute or arrest. Naya remained seated for a moment inside Spectre, her gloved hands resting calmly on the controls, her pulse steady despite the whirlwind of action unfolding around her. The breath she took was deep, deliberate, and silent. She rose slowly, unfastening the helmet with a practiced twist and lifting it free. The rush of cool desert air kissed the sweat on her face. As her boots hit the tarmac, a hush spread across the assembled personnel. Even the distant hum of the Valkyrie's engines as it cooled on the parallel runway seemed subdued in the presence of what had just happened. Someone stepped forward from the crowd. Colonel Rourke, his face unreadable, his posture rigid. He looked at her as though seeing her for the first time. Not as a name on a discharge form, not as a problem to be shuffled away, but as a pilot who had just done the impossible. "You had no authorization," he said, his voice hoarse. "No," Naya replied evenly, "but I had every reason." Before he could respond, another voice cut through the morning air. "Clear the way." The line of soldiers parted as a black SUV pulled to a stop at the edge of the landing strip. The passenger door swung open, and out stepped General Marcus Ellison, 3 stars glinting on his shoulder, his face chiseled from years of war and bureaucracy. He did not walk. He strode, each step purposeful, cutting through the fog of indecision like a blade. "Thompson," he said, stopping a few feet from her. She straightened instinctively. "Sir." His eyes searched her face, then drifted over the sleek body of Spectre behind her. That maneuver. The S-loop hyperdive. It's never been done. It has now. And Valkyrie? He asked, nodding toward the second jet where Manners was being helped from the cockpit, visibly shaken and glaring at the ground like it had betrayed him. He nearly lost it, Naya said. His modifications disrupted the control lag at high Mach. He would have blacked out during the spiral. I stabilized his trajectory. The general turned to one of the aides who had rushed to his side. I want full flight telemetry from both aircraft downloaded immediately, and pull every sim result on file for Thompson. Every evaluation. All of it. Yes, sir. Rourke's jaw twitched. With respect, General, she's violated direct protocol and executed an unauthorized flight in a restricted asset. She saved your golden boy's life, Ellison snapped, turning to him, and probably saved this entire damn project from being sold to Congress as a death trap. He looked back at Naya. You were discharged. Why take that risk? Because I knew no one else would stop him, she said. And I wasn't about to let a machine that powerful be disgraced because someone didn't listen to reason. Ellison studied her again, then nodded once. Get cleaned up. You'll be in the debriefing room in an hour. Not as a suspect, he turned, fixing Rourke with a pointed glare, but as a witness. Within minutes, the chaos began to crystallize into order. Naya was escorted not to the detention wing, but to the officers' quarters, where a private room had been cleared for her. Clean clothes were delivered, along with a sealed data pad. The pad contained a secure transcript of her flight data, along with an internal message labeled simply, "Begin review." She opened it. What she saw made her breath catch. Her simulator scores, her flight diagnostics, every overwritten log, every false flag inserted into her performance record, now fully restored. Her original assessments had placed her in the top percentile of candidates across every metric: reaction speed, adaptive logic, aeronautic control. Then came the falsifications, inserted one by one over weeks, authorized from Manners' command credentials. Someone had hacked the route logs and flagged the inconsistencies. Naya turned to see Raya Mason standing in the doorway, arms folded, expression tight. You didn't have to risk yourself, Naya said. I did, Mason replied, because if you went down alone, it wouldn't change anything. But if you landed, and someone could prove the rest, maybe it would. Naya's throat tightened. She looked back at the data. This is enough to sink him. It's already started, Mason said. Smokey leaked a backup copy to the Defense Committee just before you took off. By now, half of Washington knows. The debriefing room was not a room at all, but a converted mission theater. Tiered seating, massive screen, and a row of somber officers at the front. General Ellison presided, flanked by senior brass from multiple branches and a civilian oversight representative from the Department of Defense. Manners was seated at the far end, stone-faced and rigid. His hands clenched around the armrest, lips drawn tight. Naya sat in the center, unshackled, unguarded. Her flight suit bore no rank, but everyone there knew she had outflown every standard ever written. Ellison stood and faced the room. We are here to determine whether yesterday's events constitute a violation of military protocol or an act of operational necessity. We are also here to evaluate the conduct of Captain Roy Manners and the structural integrity of Project Valkyrie. A technician activated the screen. Telemetry flooded across it. Spectre's flight path, speed curves, acceleration charts. Then came Valkyrie's data, with flags appearing at every unauthorized system change. The air was thick with silence. Ellison turned to Manners. You falsified evaluation data. You modified system parameters outside of authorized limits, and you buried performance results that would have proven another candidate more qualified to fly. I did what I had to do, Manners said, voice cold. She doesn't represent this program. She was never meant to be the face of Aegis X. Then perhaps we need a new face, Ellison replied. He turned to Naya. You had every reason to leave, and instead you saved a pilot's life, exposed a cover-up, and executed a flight demonstration beyond anything we believed was currently possible. Naya remained still. I didn't come here to be a face. I came here to fly. Ellison smiled faintly. Good, because we don't need symbols, we need pilots. He looked to the civilian representative. Do you have any objections? None, the man said. Frankly, I'd like to see her lead the next generation of test pilots. Ellison nodded. Then it's decided. Manners stood, eyes wide. You're just gonna let her walk out of here with everything I worked for? Ellison's voice dropped to a quiet steel. You never earned it. She did. By the end of the day, the orders were formalized. Captain Roy Manners was stripped of rank, his discharge dishonorable, his record flagged for ethics violations. Project Valkyrie was suspended pending review. Spectre was officially reclassified under a new designation, SR-72B Phoenix. And Naya Thompson? She was reinstated, not as a cadet, but as a full officer. Lieutenant Naya Thompson, test pilot and project lead. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the ridgeline and the runway lights blinked to life in neat rows of amber, Naya stood beside Spectre, now Phoenix, and ran her hand along the smooth curve of its hull. Smokey approached, slower than usual, weariness dragging at his limbs, but his eyes were bright. I ever tell you what your dad said the day we built the first version of this? He asked. Naya looked over. What? He said, one day someone's gonna fly this bird the way it was meant to be flown, and it won't be a man like me. It'll be someone who never had a chance but took the sky anyway. She closed her eyes just for a moment. Then I guess we finally kept his promise. Smokey smiled, and for the first time in weeks, it reached his eyes. You sure as hell did. And above them the night sky spread wide and open, as if waiting for the next time she would rise. 6 months later, the desert air at Aegis X was different. Not lighter, not warmer, but clearer, as if some unseen weight had been lifted from the shoulders of the base itself. The old wind still whispered across the runways, and the smell of jet fuel still clung to the tarmac. But now it was undercut with something subtler. Anticipation, renewal, a future rewritten. The morning sun cast long shadows across the main airstrip as the SR-72B Phoenix rolled from its hangar with silent elegance, its obsidian black fuselage gleaming beneath the rising light. The aircraft had undergone a full structural and systems overhaul following the inquiry, but its soul, the way it moved, the way it responded to control, had remained untouched, because the one at its helm had made it hers. Naya stood beside it in full flight gear, helmet tucked under one arm, her newly issued lieutenant's bars glinting on her collar. The silver wings pinned to her chest bore the name Thompson now, not as an inherited hope, but as a proven truth. The suit fit better than it had half a year ago, molded by time, sweat, and something earned through fire. Around her, the base buzzed with quiet efficiency. Crews ran final checks. Technicians nodded in respect. Even the new recruits, many of whom had only heard of her flight from second-hand retellings, glanced at her with a mixture of awe and something more profound. Recognition. Behind her, General Ellison approached with the deliberate calm of a man who had survived enough storms to appreciate the quiet between them. His uniform was immaculate as always, his expression neutral, but his eyes held a warmth she hadn't seen during their first encounters. "Everything ready?" he asked, stopping beside her. She nodded. "Systems check completed. Airspace cleared." "You'll be flying alone?" "I always have been," she said, not unkindly. He allowed himself a rare smile. "Not anymore." She didn't respond, but he seemed to understand. There were things that didn't need to be said between people who had fought the same machine from opposite ends. Bureaucracy had nearly killed the project. It had nearly killed her. But she was still standing, and the project had been reborn. Not in spite of her, but because of her. In the months following the demonstration, Aegis X had undergone a quiet transformation. A full audit of its training protocols led to dozens of reassignments, including the permanent dissolution of the Phantom 12 cadre. Raya Mason had been promoted and transferred to the Oversight Board, where she now helped lead evaluations and reforms. Smokey had finally accepted his retirement, though he still lingered around the hangars most days, always ready with a wrench and a grumble. And Manners, once the program's shining star, had disappeared from the public record altogether. His name was now a whispered warning in classrooms, a cautionary tale for those who mistook privilege for purpose. Naya had never sought revenge, but justice, however long delayed, had finally landed. She climbed into Phoenix's cockpit with the ease of familiarity, securing herself with smooth, practiced movements. The interface lit up around her like an old friend greeting her return. As the systems powered on, she glanced to her right. There, taped to the console beneath the edge of the HUD, was a worn photograph of her father. It had survived every storm with her. His face, caught mid-laugh beside the rusted old biplane they'd tried to rebuild together, smiled up at her like a benediction. "Let's fly, Dad," she whispered. Outside, the runway tower buzzed with clearance. "Phoenix 1, your go for climb out. Runway 2 is clear. Godspeed." She responded without hesitation. "Copy that, tower. Phoenix 1 initiating rollout." The engines engaged with a deep, reverberating growl, and the aircraft began to move. Each meter of acceleration was like poetry etched into earth, the culmination of every sleepless night, every slap in the face, every slight endured in silence. When the wheels finally left the ground, it wasn't just an aircraft that rose. It was a woman who had learned to carry her own weight in a sky that had tried to shut her out. Higher and higher she climbed, past cloudline and into the blue above, the Phoenix shedding Earth like a second skin. The HUD displayed constant readouts, speed, altitude, trajectory, but her attention was fixed beyond the numbers. She knew them by feel now. The aircraft pulsed with life under her touch, responding like an extension of her own body. She had stopped flying like a student. Now she flew like an heir. At 90,000 feet, she leveled off, engaging the hypersonic mode and letting the engines spool into silence. Here, above the weather, above the limits of ordinary craft, the Earth curved gently below her, and the horizon stretched without end. In that rarefied air, alone and sovereign, she found what she had been seeking since the day she first stepped onto the base with 2 bags and a forgotten last name. Belonging. She flew for another 20 minutes, executing a series of low-thrust vector rolls and high-velocity arcs, dancing across the edge of stratosphere as if sketching her initials into the sky. The tower tracked her with silent reverence, the control crew watching her maneuvers not as a checklist but as a performance. No one spoke. No one needed to. When she began her descent, her movements were fluid, exact, guided not by automation but by instinct sharpened into art. The Phoenix responded with eager grace, its trajectory descending in perfect alignment. She touched down with the smooth finality of a punctuation mark. The wheels kissed the tarmac without protest, and the aircraft coasted to a stop beneath the watching eyes of her peers and superiors. As she climbed down from the cockpit, a familiar figure waited. Smoky, arms folded, eyes narrowed against the sun. "You fly like you're showing off," he said. "I was." He grunted. "Good. Let them see what excellence really looks like." She walked with him toward the edge of the flight line, helmet under her arm, suit unzipped halfway to reveal the sweat on her collarbones. Around them, young recruits trained in formation. Among them were faces she didn't recognize, and some she did. One, a young girl with dark braids and sharp eyes, stood a little straighter as Naya passed. The world was changing. They reached the edge of the hangars, and Smokey paused. "There's a ceremony tomorrow. Ellison wants you to say a few words. Public recognition. Medals. Maybe even a handshake from someone in a suit." Naya shook her head. "Let them write the speeches. I already gave them the only thing I needed to say." "And what was that?" She turned, looking back at the runway, at Phoenix, resting like a myth grounded only for now. "That I belonged," she said softly, "from the beginning." Smokey didn't answer. He didn't need to. The next morning, long before the speeches and the cameras and the banners with their empty slogans, Naya stood once again on the tarmac, looking up at a sky washed clean with gold. She was no longer an intruder, no longer the girl from the wrong neighborhood, or the mistake the system tried to erase. She was the pilot of the most advanced aircraft ever built. She was a lieutenant, a leader, and a legend. And as the engines of Phoenix roared to life once more, she rose not just into the sky, but into history. Above her, the air opened wide and free, waiting. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe for more. Watch the next video to see what happens when justice takes flight again. And don't forget to share this with someone who needs to see it.